Okay.
Sorry about that. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht, and I am the Vice President of Membership for the National Space Society. And on behalf of Larry Ahern, Vice President for Chapters, I'd like to welcome you to our NSS Space Forum. Where should we settle first? We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. We've got some experts here who will be giving the give and take, and we're looking forward to the great discussion. So again, as I say, we welcome you to the Space Forum, a series that we started back in April. Let me just address a couple questions that have come in prior to the forum tonight. One question had to do about our starting time and how it was not accommodating to those people, our members in Europe. We also have our members in India who are coming in pretty early as well. So what we're going to be doing is, as we close out the year, we'll be looking at how we can plan for next year and try to do our best to accommodate as many people as we can. Part of the issue is me right now, because it's very hard for me to do this during the day, during daylight hours, because of the demands of the job. But we're going to see what we can do. It might even mean trying to do something on a weekend possibly. But we'll look at all options. We might be surveying some of you just to see what your thoughts are, when the best times to try this. Also, another question came in about being able to view all the recordings. I will tell you now, we are working to get these all posted onto the National Space Society's YouTube channel. We've got a little bit more work to do. We've got about 16 of these events. So we just want to make sure we give them the right branding, of course, and make sure we have all the releases, and we'll get those up as soon as we can, and we're going to let you know, so you'll be able to access all of them and view them. One of the things we want to try to do is make sure you can view these on demand. So in case you can't see them, and we just want to make sure you'll have an opportunity to view them if you can't see it live. So again, as we move forward, I just want to remind you of some Space Forum etiquette. If you'd like to submit a question, please use only the Q&A function. So we want to try to separate Q&A and comments. So I ask you to use the Q&A function. Only the panelists can see the questions that will come in. And our moderator is going to be trying to address as many of those that were submitted prior and as many as we can take in tonight as well. If you have a comment or want to share something, then use the chat function. Now, the chat function is available and can be seen by everybody. So I ask everyone to be respectful of both the panelists and our audience. So with that out of the way, I want to do is just talk about our agenda. We're going to have some introductions from our moderator. Then we're going to go into our discussions and then follow up with Q&A. I'll be talking about some upcoming space forums, and then we'll get into just some final announcements before we adjourn the session this evening. So what I want to do now is introduce NSS Secretary and NSS Board of Director member, Anita Gale. Anita did such a great job moderating last week's session, we decided to invite her back again. So Anita's going to be introducing our speakers and running the session, and I'm going to be turning off for a few minutes, and we'll get right into everything right now. So Anita, it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Bert. And actually, I think our priority is we want to get into the meat of this. There are a lot of questions. We received over 40 questions in advance, and we know we're going to get a lot of great questions. So our two panelists tonight, Joel Sercel and Bob Zubrin, are really, if you're tied into this, you saw their bios in advance. We don't need to go through that again. I want to take all the time we can for your questions and their comments. There was a question, so we're going to address a couple of questions in advance. There was one, what does we mean in where should we first settle in space? So I'm going to try to set the tone for this. We want to have fun tonight. So if we presume every human who is interested in settling in space joins the National Space Society, then the we in this question is the National Space Society. It's us, right? That's the we. let's see, some of the questions we received, I'm not going to really ask the panelists to address. Somebody really loves bamboo out there. The answer is exactly the same as it was last week with Hannah Renz. Bamboo has been part of the discussion for growing and using in space settlements since the 1970s. We don't have to address that anymore. But there was a question, what can average citizens do in better helping support space initiatives like these? Join National Space Society. It's really simple. We had a question. What is NSS doing in the area of public policy to connect with our elected officials and ensure funding to aerospace? Well, you know what? Join National Space Society. And when you're in National Space Society, we actually have meetings. Some of them are, one of them is called March Storm. We meet with other organizations, and we actually offer opportunities for our members to meet with Congress people. And when we have an International Space Development Conference in Washington, D.C., there are more opportunities to meet with Congress people. So literally, you, through NSS, can meet with your Congress critters. The format for tonight is each speaker will have 10 minutes to make an opening statement. Bob will go first, and he's going to do his opening statement live so that there's no kind of cross-fertilization between opening statements. Joel has already pre-recorded his. So we'll have Bob go first, and then we'll do the pre-recorded Joel opening statement. We will then have rebuttals of 5 minutes each. And if the speakers decide, we will have rebuttal of 2 minutes each, unless they want to go straight into the questions. We'll wrap up, if we're on Eastern time, in about 10 minutes, 10:10 Eastern time, we'll wrap up the questions, and we'll have 5 minutes each for closing comments, and then we'll go back to birthday. Okay, so actually we're just about right on time. I am going to time the Sailboat Racing Watch. I use this for calling starts. Bob, take it away. Opening comments, 10 minutes.
Okay, so this question before us is, where should we settle first? And by we, I think what is really meant is that part of humanity that's interested in settling space. And so it's not, the question is not what should be NASA's objective in its 10-year plan of whatever. It is, what is the best place for humans to create a new branch of human civilization in space? And I would argue that it is Mars. The reason is that Mars is the closest planet that has on it all the materials needed to support life and therefore technological civilization. It has all the materials needed to be turned into the resources that can support a new branch of human civilization. Okay, let's start with the beginning, water. Okay, now there is some water on the moon, but the recent discovery is 250 parts per million in general, and there's ice in permanently shallow craters near the poles. But that's a good thing. That's much better than a moon without any water. But by contrast, on Mars, there are continent-sized regions that are 60% water in the soil. Okay, not 200 parts per million, but 600,000 parts per million. There's large areas of pure water ice. And we have now detected glaciers on Mars as far south as 38 degrees north. That's the same latitude as San Francisco on Earth, that are pure water ice. And these glaciers in mid-latitudes, basically the same latitudes that Americans live in, they contain more water than the American Great Lakes. So there is copious water on Mars. And water, of course, is the staff of life. It's fundamental. Human beings are mostly water. And beyond that, then there's carbon. Okay, carbon is practically absent on the moon, but we are carbon-based life forms. We are made of water and carbon. Everything we eat is made of carbon and water. Everything we wear is made of carbon. The plastics are made of carbon. Our furniture, wood, if it's not plastic, is made of carbon. Every material that we use, including things that are not made of carbon, like steel, are made with carbon. There's some carbon in steel, but it's not the main thing. But nevertheless, carbon is fundamental to all sorts of chemical industry processes. There's no carbon on the moon. Carbon dioxide is 95% of Mars' atmosphere. If you want carbon on Mars, just run a pump. There's nitrogen on Mars. That's the fourth element of life. It is 3% of Mars' atmosphere. There's no nitrogen to be found on the moon. There's no nitrogen to be found on asteroids. So these are the fundamentals. Furthermore, okay, while about half the elements of industry can be found on the moon, all of them can be found on Mars. And what's more to the point, Mars has had a complex geological history, which has included water action. There's large water erosion features on the surface of Mars, volcanism, and perhaps even biological activity. In other words, the same processes responsible for the creation of mineral ore, okay, on Earth have also occurred on Mars, where they have not, by and large, occurred on the moon or on the asteroids. And this is extremely important because, you know, geochemically speaking, copper, for example, is an extremely rare element on Earth. Yet human societies going back to the Bronze Age and even to Neolithic times have used copper. And why? Is because there are natural processes that have concentrated copper into mineral ore and even metallic copper. American Indians used metallic copper tools. So this was concentrated by nature. This is extremely important. Mars, of course, has a 24-hour day, extremely similar to Earth, which is beneficial to humans. It's beneficial to plants. The Martian atmosphere, as thin as it is, if you're on the surface of Mars and you look straight up, there's 16 grams per square centimeter of CO2 mostly above you, separating you from space. Okay, that's like 6 inches of water. Okay, that's as much as we would put in a solar flare storm shelter. But it's better than that because if you average it over the dome of the sky, most particles from space will come in obliquely and they average out to the equivalent of 2 feet of water. So on Mars, you are safe from solar flares. And this is very important because you can therefore grow plants on the surface of Mars in thin-walled greenhouses using natural sunlight. And that's huge. That's huge. Because if you think about how much light is needed to grow plants for, if you're talking about, say, 1 million people, okay, how much farmland is needed for that and how much light is needed to grow those crops, the number is immense. On Earth, of course, at high noon, you're getting a kilowatt per square meter. If you average over the course of the day, it's 250 watts per square meter. Okay, that means that's 250 megawatts per square kilometer to light it up. 250 megawatts to light up 1 square kilometer. And you would need thousands of square kilometers of farmland too. So that's, now we're talking hundreds of gigawatts. And we can get that in natural sunlight on Mars. The average sunlight in the low latitudes on Mars is comparable to like Alaska or Narvik, and where there is a copious biosphere. And even if you had to supplement it with artificial lights, you could do that. And you would get this tremendous benefit of order of 100 megawatts per square kilometer to benefit you. So these are tremendous advantages. And if we're talking settlement, the one advantage the moon has, of course, is that you're close to the Earth. But we're not talking here tourism. We're talking about a place to live. We're talking about going one way, and if it takes 6 months to go one way, as it took to go from England to Australia in the 1800s, it takes 6 months. You're going to settle there. And so the issue is not how quickly you can get back. The issue is what is there for you. So for the coming age of space settlement, Mars compares to, say, the moon as North America compared to Greenland in the age of European expansion. Greenland was closer to Europe. Europeans did reach it first, but it was a far poorer prospect as a place to settle. Okay, so Mars is the North America. For our generation and those that will follow us, Mars is the new world. And if we were to compare it with the asteroids, they are small, they have irregular opportunities to reach them from Earth. They have no atmosphere for shielding against cosmic rays. They don't have any nitrogen. They're not, I mean, asteroids, of course, are of interest for mining activities, but as a place to settle, as a place to establish farms, to raise children, to establish a new branch of human civilization, Mars is by far the best prospect before us.
Anita, you're muted.
There we go. I thought I unmuted. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Bob. And actually, you saved us a minute for more questions. Okay. Appreciate that. Compelling argument. Difference between visiting and settling. All right, Joel, you're going to launch your recording?
Yes. We had talked about maybe Bert playing it, but I'm happy to give a try playing it from my computer here. One moment.
If you want to do that, Joel, that's fine. I was ready to just let me know if you run into trouble.
Where to settle first in space? It's a great topic. We're all advocates of space activities, space industrialization, space settlements. Space settlements are a completely different thing than a space station or space outpost. Space settlements involve potentially millions of people building cities, moving there permanently, raising children, and having multi-generations of people in a new habitat. Financially, it involves probably hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. It involves building new nations. It involves potential international conflict, partnerships, treaties. The settlement of new territories has been fundamental to the success of the human species, but we should keep in mind that historically has been fraught with problems. Conquest of peoples, enslavement, destruction of habitats, spreading of diseases. As we grow and evolve as a species, we should learn from our past mistakes and do better the next time around. So we're all advocates of space settlements. The technology has gotten to the point where we can do it. I, for one, have no doubt that Elon Musk's SpaceX company's Starship will actually be capable of carrying hundreds of peoples on deep space missions, and that a fleet of starships could build a city on Mars. The question is that the right place to settle? And so as we start to think about this, I'd like to suggest that we use ethics as our guide. And in fact, I'd like to go a little further and suggest that we coin a new term, which I call space ethics. Space ethics to embrace things we've learned from the field of bioethics, which is a very mature and important discipline, human rights, the rule of law, and stewardship. So bioethics grew out of World War II, the atrocities that were committed by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. They did research on people without the people's willing participation. And the scientific community got together and said, we can't allow this in the future. And so over a period, actually a period of decades, protocols of bioethics were developed through careful debate and study, and they've been incorporated into the protocols of biological research and the business of biotech. And so bioethics is actually the reason why millions of people aren't selling their vital organs each year. Bioethics have saved millions of lives because it's led to the development of safe and effective drugs using protocols like, everyone has heard recently about phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials, phase 3 trials. Those are all governed by principles of bioethics. Bioethics works in the international sphere on the basis of moral suasion and inclusion. Countries that don't follow bioethics protocols know that any research that they do will not be incorporated into the global milieu. We've been educating ourselves on bioethics at TransAstra because we're moving out in the area of space biology in a few ways. And so I don't consider myself an expert on it, but I have consulted with experts, and they tell me that it's built on some tenets, like don't expose large populations to effects you don't understand. Another tenet of bioethics is that stakeholders get a voice. If you're doing drug testing in a country, because it's cost effective to test that drug or that vaccine in that country, people in that country get to weigh in on the independent review boards. They get to be heard. Human rights. Human rights are derived from the Enlightenment, with the concept that humans are born to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness or property. They're the basis of the Bill of Rights. And human rights have to be protected, built into law, and enforced. Stewardship is another aspect of space ethics. Stewardship is considered to be responsible planning and management of resources, the environment, nature, natural resources, property, cultural resources. These are the basic tenets of what I call space ethics, and I'd like to suggest that we use them as a filter to consider what we do in space. So one of the lessons learned of bioethics is that there's a big difference between a theory that something is safe and the practice of knowing it's safe. The effects of radiation and microgravity are reasonably well understood for adults with durations of exposure to low Earth orbit up to a year or two. So there are theories that it might be safe to live at lunar or Martian gravity for extended periods of time. There's no data to prove that at all. In terms of multi-generational effects, or the effects on developing children, we have far less data than, say, the results of a single phase 1 drug trial. In fact, typically before you do a phase 1 drug trial, you do both experiments with cell cultures and experiments with animals, but we haven't done that. So we would need thousands of times more data than we have now for ethical space settlements to be seriously proposed for Mars or the Moon. So for now, given the lack of data, ethical space settlements must provide Earth normal gravity and radiation. Probably the most important scientific and philosophical question that humanity faces is, are we alone in the universe? Most scientists who look at it say, if there is extraterrestrial life, one likely place to find it is Mars. But if it's there, we don't know what its nature is. We don't know what its toxicity to us is. We don't know if its durability. Imagine if we were to start a large settlement on Mars, or even, as some people have proposed, start terraforming Mars and destroy an entire ecosystem before we even knew it existed. Theory doesn't count. If we're going to be responsible stewards, we have to go on what we know. So as far as space ethics go, the only viable approach right now is to provide habitats with full Earth gravity and full radiation protection. And the only approach that we know to do that in space was the approach that was developed by Gerard O'Neill in the 1970s, which is O'Neill-like colonies in cislunar space. Al Globus, who's very active in the National Space Society, has developed a low Earth orbit concept, which might be a good prototype for that, called Kalpana. So, where should we settle first? We don't know enough really to answer the question. There's no shame in admitting that you don't know. The only shame is pretending that you know all the answers, says Neil deGrasse Tyson. So it would be highly unethical to send settlers to Mars based on what we know. It would be a violation of all international standards of bioethics, a terrible breach of our duty of stewardship for potential Martian life. It's premature in terms of legality and international law. Protocols for even thinking about that haven't been established. Countries like China will probably move quickly. Now, they violate human rights commonly in their factories and in the way they run their country. And they'll bring that into space. They're acting as a colonial power with their creation of new land and extending territorial control over the China Sea. And they've essentially said that they'll do the same thing in space. So what should we do? What we should do is we should move as fast as responsibly possible to really learn to live and work in deep space and to find the answers to the questions of where can we live safely in space. We should focus on cislunar space, where we're only a few days away from the Earth in case of emergency. We can build outposts on the moon with thousands of people. We can grow from tens of people to hundreds of people to thousands of people over time as we learn about safety. We can extend the duration of time on the moon. We can build hotels and research stations on the moon. We can build an outpost in Mars orbit from which we can teleoperate hundreds of surface robots and rovers on the surface of the planet. We can start mining water and other valuable resources on the moon to support industry and outposts on the moon and in cislunar space. So let's start to have an inclusive dialogue on the ethics of space settlements and the ethics of large-scale human activities in space. The National Space Society can provide a very important forum and leadership in this area. We should reach out to the Space Council, which is responsible for coordinating government activities in the United States, and engage with them, engage with think tanks, engage with the general public, and let's do this right. Let's be responsible and careful in what we do.
All right, thank you, Joel. Another compelling argument. All right, Bob, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal.
Okay, yeah. Well, there's a problem with O'Neill colonies as the first place that we could settle in space, which is the fantastical cost and logistical requirements. A typical small O'Neill colony, you're talking about an object with a mass on the order of billions of tons. And whereas even a really badly designed human Mars mission, you have an initial mass in LEO of hundreds of tons. If you want to send 1,000 such ships to Mars, you have an initial mass in LEO of hundreds of thousands of tons. So we're talking about a 4 order of magnitude difference in the difficulty. So the bottom line here is it's much easier to settle a planet than to build one, okay? And that is why Europeans came to America as opposed to creating their own continents in the middle of the ocean. Now, the arguments that Joel has made about bioethics are completely off base, okay? I mean, comparing Mars colonies to experiments being done involuntarily on people is absurd because Mars colonists are going to go voluntarily. No one is talking about shipping people to Mars against their will. People are going to go to Mars in order to strike their own path, to create their own world, and they will take their chances to do it. You know, when America was discovered, there were Europeans who actually wrote tracts saying that life could not develop properly in America, that animals and humans would not develop into proper humans, that they would be weak and small and inferior. And so the people who came here to settle, okay, initially they had to just brush that aside as it deserved to be. But people who came later there were any number of risks involved in settling America. There are risks involved in staying home. But these are voluntary risks taken by people. This is not something being done to people. Now, also, this question of no one is talking about settling Mars tomorrow. Mars settlement will be preceded by Mars exploration. We will know if there is a biosphere on Mars. We will know what the effects of Mars gravity are on humans because we will have astronauts, on Mars, first on exploration missions and then at Mars bases. So we will obviously learn a great deal about Mars before we send 1 million people to Mars to settle Mars. So it's kind of off track here to say, well, it's unethical to go to Mars because we don't know enough about Mars. We're going to know a great deal about Mars by exploring Mars, and we'll know even more about settling it. And then finally, this invocation of this planetary protection argument, I'm frankly shocked that Joel should join that crowd, because that is being advanced by a group of people who are advancing ethics, saying that planets have a right to be left alone. And that is actually a pantheistic argument. It's a primitive point of view. Mars, the moon, they do not have rights. They are inanimate objects. They can't do anything. They can't want to do anything. Okay, rights are for beings that have aspirations, like people. Okay, and the argument of limiting human aspirations to protect these entities from change is not an ethical argument. It's an aesthetic argument, and it's an anti-human argument. So frankly, I'm shocked that Joel should bring it up. And as far as finding out about Mars is concerned, there's no way to find out more about Mars, find out the truth about whether there's life on Mars and how it managed to diversify if it's there, than by going there. We know the most of any planet is Earth, and the reason why is because we are here. Okay, if we want to find out the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe, we're going to have to go to the place where new forms of life are to be found. We need to seek out new life and create new branches of civilization. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, good timing. You reset
Anita,
the,
can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So,
Joel, are you ready for your 5 minutes rebuttal? Go for it.
yes, sure. So Bob has either misunderstood or mischaracterized what I've said here. So let me clarify a few things. If what Bob was saying about bioethics was true, then you would have a right to go to a grocery store right now and buy a coronavirus vaccine. But I didn't. But the issue with bioethics, no one's suggesting that anyone's going to force anyone to go to Mars like Nazi experiments. But the issue is you can't profit from selling products that violate bioethical protocols. And the issue here is it's perfectly ethical to send a few highly trained astronauts on a mission to a place like Mars. It is not ethical to send thousands of common people, or millions, as Elon Musk and Bob and you're talking about, to Mars before you understand the biological implications. And it's not even the first generation people, as in the case of the thalidomide children that I showed in the video. It's their children and their children. What we know now about gene expression and epigenetics is that what you experience in your life is inherited by your children, not just genetically, but epigenetically and through gene expression. And there are very good biological theories that suggest that every generation that lives in reduced gravity and higher radiation would be sicker and weaker than the one before if they were viable at all. Also, lifespan would be dramatically reduced because, for example, the immune system is maintained by an organ in your chest called the thalamus, which is maintained by human growth hormone, which is dramatically reduced in reduced gravity environments. So involution of the thalamus is highly correlated with aging. And as you have less human growth hormone, you also have less autophany and regeneration of tissues that are damaged by radiation, which would cause tremendously increased cancer rates. We can't just pretend that it's safe, we have to know it's safe. Also, Bob, I think you were mistaken in your characterization of planetary protection and the ethics therein. The issue with stewardship is about, the question is, where should we settle? And the answer is, we don't know enough about Mars to say we should settle there ethically now, because there may be life. Now, you agree that before we settle on Mars, we should explore it thoroughly. The problem is, given that we know nothing about any extraterrestrial life form, and given that there's a large community within the science, there's a large group within the science community that thinks there might be life on Mars. We have no idea if a human spacecraft were to crash on Mars, what the millions of microbes inside of human bodies would do to a purported Martian biosphere. So the issue is not to destroy it for the scientific explorers of future generations, especially when we know that we can settle with O'Neill colonies. Gerard O'Neill proved the science and engineering on that back in the 1970s. Your statement that O'Neill colonies involve so much more mass than Mars colonies is simply false. If you go to Mars, you have to live underground. The amount of material that you have to move in order to live underground on Mars is pretty much the same as the amount of material that you have to move by electromagnetic launch from the moon in order to build O'Neill colonies. And so characterizing it as having launched these ridiculous quantities of material from the Earth is just not a fair characterization. Then we can also talk about a lot of the advantages that you described about Mars are actually over-exaggerated. So being on a differentiated planet is actually a disadvantage from a mining perspective. For example, asteroids, metallic asteroids, are much better than terrestrial ores in terms of their richness of different materials. The statement that there's no carbon on the moon is now known to be false. L-Cross detected carbon on the moon, and the moon is an undifferentiated planet or surface, so that when carbonaceous asteroids have made impacts on the moon, we can expect to find that carbon in those craters. So pretty much any element you want, except nitrogen, can be expected to be found on the moon in crater impacts. So I could go on, but I think my time is just about up.
Yes, right on. All right.
So just,
am I? Yeah. All right. So I don't think I even have to ask. I'm sure we want to do rebuttals. So Bob, you have 2 minutes for rebuttal on that.
Okay. I'm going to focus really on this planetary protection thing because this is being mustered right now to try to destroy Mars exploration. This argument is totally false. First of all, there's natural transport of materials between Earth and Mars. We get about 500 kilograms of Martian rocks landing on Earth every year. And a number of these have been examined closely. And what the studies have shown is that large parts of these rocks, in their entire career of ejection from Mars, flight through space, re-entry, and landing on Earth, were never raised above 40 centigrade. And what that means, if there was microbes in those rocks, bacteria, they could have survived the trip. And it is really true going the other way. Okay, so Earth materials have gone to Mars already. Mars materials have gone to Earth. So this issue of cross-contamination is a false issue. And by the way, it is imposing tremendous costs on the Mars sample return mission. And it makes as much sense as instructing the Border Patrol to inspect the cars of tourists crossing the border to make sure they're not bringing in Canada geese. Because the Martian microbes have their own spaceships already. They've got millions of their own spaceships already, and they've been coming here. Now humans will go to Mars, and the idea, okay, first of all, that humans could ever drive Martian microbes into extinction. I mean, here we are, we would do anything we could to drive the coronavirus into extinction, and we can't do it. And there's no possibility whatsoever that humans going to Mars could cause the extinction of the Martian biosphere. What humans going to Mars could do is allow the discovery of the Martian biosphere, and we could learn something about the truth and the potential development of life. The idea that humans should not go to Mars is not a boon to science. It's an attack on science. The idea that if humans go to Mars, we wouldn't be able to distinguish whether we found life on Mars, whether we had brought it, or whether, I'm over time?
Yeah.
Well, we know there was life on Earth before people from fossils. If we go to Mars, if we find microbes and they're native, there'll be fossils as well.
Okay, so Bob,
right.
once again you've mischaracterized what I've said in a couple of key points. First of all, planetary protection is mainstream science, okay? It's mainstream ethics. And your speculation that Mars microbes, if they exist, first of all, your speculation that they're microbes is speculation. We don't know. Your speculation that they're hardy against terrestrial microbes is speculation. We don't know. It is true that kilograms of Mars material get transported to the Earth every year, but they typically spend many millions of years in space before they get here. And the probability, and because of Earth's gravity well being so much larger than Mars, and also Earth has a legitimate atmosphere, not a excuse for an atmosphere. It's extremely difficult to get material out of the Earth's gravity well. The only significant material that's been to Mars from the Earth in recent years has been on landers that have been put there by people. So we can't make up results and pretend we know things about Mars life when we don't. We both agree that Mars science is important, and that's why I would advocate an orbital station around Mars with hundreds of properly sanitized robots on Mars. And by the way, we can learn virtually everything scientifically about Mars from that approach than we could through a few astronauts walking around, planting flags and making footsteps. Go ahead, Anita.
All right, let's get into questions. So this is a combination of my favorite question is, what are the economics of each location? And we also had a question from people registering, what exports will pay for the settlement? So those are kind of two different versions of the same question. So I'm not sure how we're going to handle who wants to answer first, and then we'll have an answer on the other person.
Well, why don't we have Joel go first, because so far the back and forth has always been I speak and he rebuts.
That's a good point. All right, Joel, go for it.
That seems very fair. It may be that one of the major exports from space is power, from space power, solar power satellites. Long before solar power satellites make economic sense, actually, relatively soon, if you run the numbers, it'll be more cost effective to do data processing in space than on the ground. And as the internet backbone moves into space, as Amazon with Kuiper and SpaceX with Starlink put the internet backbone in space, it'll make more sense to put large data centers in space. That's actually a tremendous area of growing energy consumption on the planet. So building massive data centers in space in low Earth orbit will be important. Al Globus's concept of low Earth orbit settlements could be a place where people could work on those. However, I really think we've missed the killer app for space. I've asked myself for decades, what's the killer app for space? And it's now, I think, become clear. The killer app for space is the same killer app that was the killer app for settling North America, and it's real estate. It's getting away from the crazies in the old country. And it's pretty clear that Starship and maybe New Glenn will be cost effective enough that normal people will be able to buy tickets to go into space. When they do, they're going to want to go out and settle. And it's going to be a wave of settlement, just like the wave of settlement that drove North America. The idea that you could somehow pay for people to go to Mars to be internet workers, which some people have suggested, that's just ridiculous. If you're going to be an internet worker, be an internet worker. So that's my answer.
All right, Bob. I'm not timing these, so we're going to
let me throw one other thing in. We now know that there are thousands of asteroids with delta V's, with return delta V's less than the moon. And as space transportation becomes cost effective, it'll make huge economic sense to bring precious metals back from asteroids. That'll be a huge export. As transport gets cheap enough for space settlements, transport will get cheap enough for bringing precious metals and strategic materials from the asteroid belt.
Okay, Bob, go for it.
Okay. it is people who create wealth, okay? And there's really no such thing as a natural resource. There's only natural raw materials. It is resourceful people that turn materials into resources. And the greatest creation of wealth are ideas created by the human mind. What will be the export of Mars? I believe it will be invention. That is, what we're talking about creating on Mars is not a mining settlement. It's not a tourist camp. We're talking about creating new branches of human civilization. And you create a new branch of human civilization in a new land where a great deal needs to be invented to make this work. And a Mars city will be a group of technologically adept people in a frontier environment where they're going to be forced to innovate and free to innovate. And so they're going to have to innovate, and they will. And there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, for instance, acreage on Mars will be greenhouses, much smaller in acreage than you can have in fields on Earth. And so they're going to be driven to develop ultra productive crops. And they will not be restricted by precautionary principles of people worried about killer giant tomatoes. They will be pragmatists, and they will seek to develop ultra productive crops. There'll be a tremendous labor shortage on Mars, both in numbers and in diversity of skills. So they'll have a tremendous incentive to develop labor-saving machinery, robotics, artificial intelligence. We can expand the range of the skills of the individuals that you have there. Deuterium is 5 times more common on Mars as it is on Earth. And there's, while there conceivably could be fossil fuels on Mars, they would not be a source of energy because you need oxygen to burn fossil fuels. Maybe fusion power will be developed on Mars because they can't get energy from waterfalls or coal or windmills. I believe that just as Yankee ingenuity was the almost a stereotype of American society in the 19th century, Martian ingenuity will be a leading characteristic of Martian settlement. We're talking about creating a creative branch of human civilization. Okay, Europeans, some of them may have come to America looking for gold, but the real wealth that America brought to Europe was invention of electricity and aeroplanes and computers and nuclear power and the internet and so forth. We've revolutionized the world, and we're talking about creating inventive branches of human civilization. And as far as real estate is concerned, well, okay, fine, you need to develop it, but on Mars it's already there. Okay, as Mars has got a surface area equal to all the continents of the Earth put together. There is no real estate in Earth orbital space. There's no there. If you want to sell real estate, you should establish a colony that has real estate to sell.
So we recently did a study for NASA on the cost of building an O'Neill type colony in cislunar space out of either lunar electromagnetically launched materials or materials brought back from the asteroid. And we showed that you could actually build apartment buildings in an O'Neill type colony for less than the cost of apartment buildings in Manhattan. So building worlds in space is creating real estate. I completely agree with all the benefits of space settlement that Bob just talked about, but not one of those benefits was unique to Mars. Any place that we settle in Mars would provide all of those benefits of human ingenuity and inventiveness and all that sort of thing. I agree, Bob, a lot of great thoughts there. None of them are unique to Mars. They're advocacy for space settlements, which we agree on. And by the way, I'm not saying never settle Mars. I'm saying we should move out aggressively, not with permanent settlements, but with outposts and habitats in cislunar space to learn the practical art of living and working in space. And and evolve towards space settlements. And as we learn the practical lessons required to make it responsible so that we don't kill millions of future generation children through just biologically irresponsible actions. You know, the science of biology has taught us that just because one engineer thinks something is safe for future generations doesn't mean it is. In fact, biologists, most of the cures, most of the approaches that they come up, most bio interventions wind up being unsafe, and for reasons that are not understood. We have to be really serious about it. My real thrust here today is to ask us to be a little bit more careful in what we talk about humans doing in space, to think more about the ethics of it, and consider how it could be read by the world. Rick Tumlinson.
Joel, I'm going to interrupt. We have a lot of questions. Bob, do you want to respond to that or go to more questions?
Well, I'll just respond very briefly. To say, look, obviously we're not going to send 1 million people to Mars until we've explored it and actually have a base there, and we'll know all sorts of things about any biological effects of living in 1/3 gravity and so forth. But Mars has a tremendous advantage if we're talking about doing things incrementally. You can build a small Mars base. You can't build a small O'Neill colony. You
can build small spin
stations.
Let's
go on to more questions. Okay, let's go on to another question. Okay.
You actually can. We did a NIAC study on that, Bob. That's just a false statement. Okay. Read the literature.
We could go on for 3 hours with this, I could tell. All right, sure. We had several questions. I count 5 of them that I'm going to read. That basically, I think the answers, you might have short answers to these. I think the answers to these questions are either money or more money. And we'll see what you two have to respond to this. So let's see, questions were, what scenarios do you envision that would allow the soonest settlements possible? How do budgetary and technical challenges constrain the most optimistic scenarios? Budget. Why are we not already on Mars, and how fast can we get there? That's money. What is holding up demonstrating artificial gravity through rotation of 2 structures on a tether or an inflatable cylinder? Money. What do you feel is the biggest hurdle our civilization needs to conquer in order to become a strong, spacefaring society? I think all those are money. Do we have any other answer from either of you?
Yeah, I don't think it's money.
Yeah, I actually agree with Joel on that point. I mean, a few of them, money is important, but I think, artificial gravity has to do with not being tested, has to do with the space program controlled by a now group of people, and the space medicine community controlled by zero gravity health effects researchers. That's the only reason why NASA hasn't researched artificial gravity.
Totally. It's a sort of a governmental approach and a lack of innovation. What's really exciting about what's happening in space is guys like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and different entrepreneurs like Bob doing great innovative things to really blow the lid off the thinking. Why haven't we done exciting things in space in the last 50 years? We did Apollo, which was premature and not sustainable. It was a government program. And then we spent billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on the space station and the space shuttle, which were based on 1970s technology. And instead, we should have been doing the kind of public-private partnership and private sector ventures that are happening now. If we had, we would have all these outposts. We would have, thousands of human years of experience of biological research in cislunar space, and we could talk seriously about settlements on Mars or the Moon or O'Neill colonies. So it's very exciting that the private sector and historical figures like Elon and Jeff are in this. That's what's going to make it happen. That's the awesome thing that's happening. Less government, more private sector, more public-private partnership.
I agree with that, most of that. What I would disagree is the characterization of Apollo as being premature and unsustainable. Apollo was a major breakthrough, and it would have easily been sustainable had the political class decided to sustain it. It was vastly cheaper than the Vietnam War. NASA's budget in the 70s and 80s or even the 90s was less than 1% of the federal budget. You could have doubled it and you never would have missed it. But what we had was a deterioration of the political class. The people that got us to the moon were the younger brothers of the people that won World War II. And the political class of that time knew how to do great projects, knew how to work together, you know, won the war, developed atomic energy, built the interstate highways. So they done all sorts of projects that the political class became incapable of subsequent to the loss of the Vietnam War. And so the real issue is not that government can't do it, but that you can't count upon only one driver to do it. That is, sometimes the government does hit the ball, okay, and certainly in those days it did. But then it missed, and we had a massive failure in leadership with the Nixon administration, the Carter administration in this country, and the government initiative basically fell apart. And then here's where I agree with Joel. It's not just that we have private sector involvement, although I think that's very important. It's that we have diverse players involved, that we have, you know, it's quite possible that Musk or Bezos could skate off the edge of the ice or lose interest. I mean, look, Paul Allen died, and his company ceased to be a candidate for doing much. But having the private sector means not just that we have the private sector, but we have lots of different players here with different ideas. And, you know, okay, Musk, you know, is more along my line of thinking. Mars is the place. Bezos believes in the O'Neill colonies. And we'll get a chance. This really isn't going to be a debate settled by debaters' points between me and Joel Sercel. It's going to be settled by which program proves better in practice. They're both going to be tried.
I agree. And I think the fact that SpaceX has recently started to call for lunar outposts that are mining millions of tons a year tells us that actually SpaceX is, you know, that Elon has started to realize that you've got to spend a good deal of time getting practical experience in cislunar space first. I do want to go back to my real estate comment. I was speaking loosely there. Really, I think it's going to be human travel that's going to drive it. And there are 250,000 people on the earth that have more than $30 million of cash. And that is a really nice nugget to start a really big deep space tourism industry. And I think it'll pay for a lunar hotel. And I think that's going to be a really big business. And there was recently a study that even suborbital tourism is a, you know, tens of billions of dollars a year industry. I think orbital tourism, lunar tourism, these are going to be huge industries. I think, you know, Jeff Bezos is quoted as believing in that. I get the impression that probably he's driving in that direction. And I think that's going to be a huge economic driver to make all this happen. But I think the private sector in partnership with government, I think the model of the Transcontinental Railroad with government partnering with industry to open up a frontier is going to be the one that works. And just in the last few years, the leadership in NASA is better than it's been in decades. And we need to see more of this kind of stuff.
So actually, I think we just had an answer to the next question is, what would be the best strategy to promote public-private partnerships and international alliances? Did you want to add more on that?
Well, let me add something to it, because I do agree that we're going to want and need public-private partnerships. But I think, frankly, a lot of the initiative here is going to have to come from the private side. And let me give you an idea of something that I think is probably going to happen over this next decade. You know, I think Starship is going to fly. And whether it reaches orbit next year or the year after or in 2023, you know, certainly by 2024, starships are going to be flying to orbit. And Musk wants to send humans to Mars. That is what he wants to do. That is why he founded SpaceX. And if Musk is saying, I've got the ships, if you guys will meet me halfway, okay, then, you know, whoever's elected president in 2024, they see starships flying to orbit, fully reusable heavy lift vehicles, and they say, can we have people on Mars by the end of my second term? Yes. Will it cost hundreds of billions of dollars? No, we've already got the transportation system. We need a bunch of other stuff. but we could certainly do it within NASA's existing budget. He's going to need space nuclear reactors. He can't develop that. It needs controlled materials. That's the job for the government. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to be developed that, while they could be developed in the private sector, are not that attractive to the private sector, because unlike a launch vehicle, they themselves are not commercial. Mars rovers, Mars spacesuits, Mars ISRU systems. So NASA could fund that. Meet Musk halfway, and we're on Mars by 2030. So I think that by making these visions feasible, the entrepreneurs are going to make them sellable, and we'll see who gets out front here. Will it be Musk with the Mars vision, or will it be Bezos with the L5 vision? We'll see. But
I don't think Bezos has said he's an
that,
L5er. I think he's left it ambiguous. I don't think Bezos has said he's an L5 vision. I think he's left it ambiguous. He said clearly the long-term potential for humanity is in deep space with worlds built out of asteroids. And there's enough material in the asteroids to build worlds with a carrying capacity for, trillions of people, 1,000 times the carrying capacity of the Earth. But in the more short term, whether it's the moon or O'Neill colonies, I think is a little bit up for grabs. There was a question, what's the first thing we could do to settle in space? And I got to say that Al Globus's LEO habitat concept is very interesting. I've looked at his radiation calculations and I find them credible. I think they need to be peer reviewed. And if it's true, that's a pretty compelling case. It should be less energetically expensive to launch people into low Earth orbit on equatorial orbits. And if you don't have to provide that radiation shielding, it can be great for lots of people. It'd be a good testing ground. So I'd like to give a shout out to that concept. I think it's very powerful, and it could evolve into more substantial deep space habitats. The only problem with equatorial is that if you're going to put a hotel in equatorial low Earth orbit, it's boring because you spend all your time over the ocean. And space tourists want to look down at the astronauts say when you go to the space station, you want to look down at the Earth. Bob, I'd like to challenge you on something that I think you and I disagree a little bit on, and that is flags and footprints on Mars. My belief is that Apollo was unsustainable primarily because it was a government program that didn't have a good economic motivation. To have an economic motivation, the private sector has to be co-investing. I think we could easily put flags and footprints on Mars in an Apollo type program, in 8 years, 10 years, something like that. But, where I think we disagree is I don't think that's sustainable in the same sense that it would just be a government program with no profit. It's got to be a public-private partnership.
Okay. Now, first of all, I have never been an advocate of flags and footprints missions to Mars. If anybody wants to know my ideas for how to do missions to Mars, I've written a book on it as well as many papers. And the essence of the Mars Direct Plan, or key aspects of it, is long duration stays on Mars starting on the very first mission, use of Martian resources starting on the very first mission. So we're not going to Mars to do flags and footprints. Now, we are very much interested in doing extensive exploration on Mars, which requires time on the surface. Human explorers on the surface can do, first of all, they need time. And second of all, Steve Squires, who is the principal investigator of the NER rover mission, and who was a geologist, said there's nothing the rovers could do on Mars that he could not do as a geologist if he was there in 1/1000th the time. And there's any number of things that he could do that they can't do at all. And so to adequately explore Mars and to learn the truth, I think NASA's initial motivation is scientific, learn the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe. If we're going to be able to characterize Martian life, we're going to have to set up drilling rigs, drill down half a kilometer, bring up water samples, see if there's life in it. Because if there's life on Mars today, that's where it is. It's in underground water. It's not on the surface. These things are way beyond the abilities of robotic rovers. So an extensive exploration program supported by a Mars base, comparable, say, to McMurdo Sound, is a good initial start on Mars. And that will also, in the experience of that, resolve these various questions that Joel has brought up in terms of how human physiology responds to 1/3 gravity and so forth.
Well,
We're going to learn about all these things. We're going to learn about all these things before anybody starts sending millions of people to Mars.
Now the issue.
So actually, I'm going to interrupt here because we're at the end of the time for answering questions, so we didn't get to many of them. So let's go now to closing arguments. And since we started with Bob, we're going to give the first 5-minute closing argument to Joel. And you were ready to start that anyway, I gathered. So I'm going to time this again.
Oh,
5
I
minutes
wasn't.
for close.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Rick Tumlinson, who is a person who is good at turning a phrase, he named new space, and he recently wrote an essay that really got my attention, and it's called The Elysium Effect. And what he's arguing is that we have a real possibility of a backlash in the general public and the media against a billionaire-led program of human exploration and space settlement. And he calls it the Elysium Effect because it's named after the Matt Damon movie, where billionaires live in O'Neill-like colonies where it's splendor and health, and people on the earth live in squalor and so on. What his argument is that there's a real chance of an envy kind of a reaction here. 4 more minutes. I think it's a compelling argument. Bob, I think you and I are probably, if we lived in an ideal world, we'd like to see a lot more nuclear reactors on the earth producing clean, safe electric power. Can you give me a thumbs up on that? If it wasn't for the irrational regulatory regime and the mass hysteria that the public has about nuclear power. Where did that mass hysteria come from? It came from a movie called the China Syndrome, which really, and then what happened was the intelligentsia latched onto that, and they got with the media, and they really killed nuclear power on the earth, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree with that. The issue here, now, I love what NASA recently did with the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords are a set of basically international agreements about peaceful settlement, peaceful exploration, and industrialization of the moon. And NASA took a leadership position, got half a dozen other countries to sign off on it. If you look at it, some of the principles of space ethics that I talk about are embedded in it. Also, NASA has worked hard to make sure that the right of property ownership is respected in space. And I think this initiative that they've taken to actually offer to buy lunar regolith from the first group that can show on a robot that they've grabbed some regolith and taken a picture of it is just brilliant. But of course, a very highly regarded science journal, let's see, was it Science or Nature? Now I can't remember. I think Science. Some scientists from, some planetary scientists have wrote something saying that how can NASA do this? They're not, taking a socialist approach to this, and how can you have countries involved in deciding what good treatment of the environment on the moon is, and that sort of thing? How can countries regulate these things? So this negative backlash is starting. So I want to be really clear. The reason I'm advocating this real careful discussion of ethics and the principles of bioethics that include inclusion of communities in the discussions, really looking at the implications to the human experience, looking at the biological implications, and then also stewardship and being careful about stewardship. So this does not mean be an environmentalist crazy person. This does not mean take no risks. This means take smart risks and don't violate well-established ethical and legal principles when you're doing it. Don't talk as though you know things that you don't know, and don't say we're going to put millions of people on Mars before we know the answer. Let's be, and I'm not suggesting you have, Bob, but let's be responsible in the way that we talk and think about this. Let's consider the ethics first, and let's be as aggressive and rapid and industrial as we can, but let's do it right. Let's do it right. And that means really learning to live and work ethically and safely in space and cislunar first before we skip the moon and jump to Mars.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Bob, you've got 5 minutes to close.
Okay, I think the issue is ethics is important, but I think Joel has a severe misunderstanding of what is a humanistic basis of ethics and what is an anti-humanistic basis of ethics. And by the way, I have written a whole book on this subject as well, and it's called Merchants of Despair, and people can get it on Amazon. Okay, because this anti-human movement didn't begin when the Democratic Party turned against nuclear power in the 1970s. This movement has been around for a very long time. And the fundamental thesis of anti-humanism is that humans are vermin consuming creation. And therefore, their numbers, activities, and liberties must be severely constrained, from which it follows that someone must be empowered to do the constraining. And that is why intellectuals who espouse one variant or another of this thesis have never lacked for funding. Malthus was the first of the modern variants of this. There's previous ones that did not try to presume to be scientific, but this was the basis of Malthusian policies that starved Ireland in the 1840s and India in the 1870s. This was the basis in a different way of the eugenics movement, of Nazism, of the population control movement, of, yes, the so-called environmental movement. The fundamental issue here is, okay, if humans are consumers, they need to be constrained. If humans are creators, they need to be liberated. Okay, and that's the fundamental goal here. And that's the issue that is at stake. Okay, and this issue that planets need to be protected from people in order to, this is an argument for constraining human activity. That's all it is. That the human beings are a criminal species, and therefore anything they do is necessarily wrong. You know, the Chinese have a proverb, which is, where there is a will to convict, evidence is never lacking. Okay, so in the 1970s, there was the global cooling trend, and people like Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb, said there's global cooling, it's being caused by industrial pollution, so therefore numbers and industrial activities must be severely constrained. In the 80s, the climatic trend turned, there's warming, and it's being caused by industrial activities, and therefore industry and numbers of people must be severely constrained. Why do they hate nuclear power? They hate it because it's solving a problem they need to have. Okay, if you want to say that human industrial activity is an intolerable environmental insult, there's nothing worse for you than a technology that proves that it isn't. And that is why this has been the number one target of the anti-human movement in terms of the various energy technologies. I myself am a nuclear engineer, and I can remember debating Sierra Club in the 70s, and once again, they say they're against smoke and pollution. I said, well, it doesn't have any. And they said, well, we hate it. And so this is the fundamental issue at stake here. And people need to understand, ethics need to be based in humans, okay? Adolf Hitler killed millions of people, but he benefited trillions of bacteria by doing so. We call him a bad person. Albert Schweitzer brought medicines to Africa. He killed trillions of bacteria and saved, well, at least thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people. We say he is a good man. Okay, the ethics need to be based in people. And anyone who would say that we shouldn't save a person because it would harm microbes would be deemed mad, and rightly so. And people who say we must stay off of Mars because there could be microbes there that could be hurt by our presence, they have inverted ethics. It is not an ethical position. It's an aesthetic position. It's a position that a sterile universe would be better than a populated one. and it is one with which I think is profoundly flawed and which we must combat if there's going to be a positive human future in space, or for that matter, on Earth.
So do I get a 2-minute rebuttal?
Well, no, actually, it was just 5 minutes each, and I know you're just itching to rebut. However, we're at the point where we need to turn this over to Bert. Now, I am going to ask one tiny question of Bob. When were you on campus at the University of Washington?
Oh, that was in the 80s. That was in graduate school.
Oh, okay. I was on campus 1969 to 1974 in aeronautics and astronautics. You probably had some of the same professors. All right.
Imagine I did.
Bert,
Stewardship is about preserving for the future of humanity. Stewardship is
no, stewardship is about creating. Stewardship is about continuing the work of creation. Okay. That is the divine nature of the human spirit, to continue
so you and I
the
are
work
both
of
humanists. You've mischaracterized or misunderstood my argument. I want to preserve for future generations, not
I
for
want to create for future generations.
I also want to create for future generations. We're in agreement on that. We're both humanists. Just because you want to be a good steward does not mean you are anti-human. In fact, good stewardship
stewardship is creating more. You and I have a much richer life today because people took this virgin continent of America and transformed it into a continental nation with 300 million people, with cities and universities and used bookstores.
The question is, how do we do it without creating the negative backlash that can kill the whole thing?
By showing the power and the benefits of human creativity.
And also showing that we're responsible and careful and ethical.
Well, the thing is, the concept that it is ethical to constrain human activities to keep nature as it is not an ethical position. It's an aesthetic position.
But we need to preserve nature for future generations. Okay. All right. Well, this was a great conversation.
Joel, I think we're going to have to close it for tonight.
All right. This was fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you much. Cheers. Thank you, Bert.
You were doing great up until that ending there, Anita.
Sorry, lost control. We got down to 10:20 and lost control. Sorry about that.
No,
that's about the best web seminar I've ever seen.
Wow, that's quite a high.
That was really good.
It was fabulous. So, Anita, you made a comment about this. We could do this for 3 more hours. I think we could do this for several days, actually. So maybe we'll invite them back and continue the discussion.
Bob, I really think you and I are philosophically aligned at the 95% level. It's a matter of we're both humanists. We're both. I bet you lean towards objectivism.
I want to thank you so much. That was entertaining. That was fascinating. That was insightful. That was thought-provoking. So. It really was a great conversation, and really do appreciate you taking the time to join us and share that with the National Space Society members. And also I want to thank the National Space Society members. There are so many comments and questions. I know we couldn't get to them. What I've tried to do is I've captured them all. I think what we'll try to do is sort them and pass them on to our panelists, so maybe we can get some of them answered. So because they're so good. And our membership is so knowledgeable and insightful as well. So thank you for all of that. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. And Anita, thank you so much again for doing such a great job and really getting this going and getting the exchanges. And also I thank you guys for your humor too. So that really adds to things as well. So as we close out, I just want to also thank Larry Ahern from the Vice President of Chapters for, again, helping us get these arranged, and Al Globus also for his help in getting this I call it debate arranged as well. And Fred Becker, as always, for serving as the host and doing all the technical things that need to happen. So again, it was a really good event. So I just want to close out a few things, and I'll share my screen again. I also am putting something into the chat, which is something that I had on the slide decks before. So let me just share my screen one last time. And that's where I'm saving some of the all the chat and all the questions. So here we go. So coming up, we do have 2 more town halls scheduled. So one is coming up on November 19th. We've got a couple of invites out, a primary who I'm waiting to hear back from, and then a backup just in case. So we don't want to announce anything right now, but November 19th, so 2 weeks from tonight. So we'll be sending out more information about that. So I hope you'll be able to join us. Then we did have another one tentatively scheduled for December 10th. We found out, or I found out yesterday too, that is the first night of Hanukkah. We certainly don't want to intrude on the holiday. So we're going to take a look and see what we can do about that, and if we can adjust that. And then, as I said before, we are working on the plan for 2021. And I think we'll be surveying everybody just to see what ideas they have in terms of when the best time to do these, and possibly even ideas you have for some topics. So we appreciate your feedback. What I put in the chat is a copy of this slide, as I do this every time. So again, I ask everyone, check out the NSS website. We're constantly putting new content there, space.nss.org. And if you haven't yet signed into our member portal inside nss.org, please do so. It is for members only, but we're also working to get new content there. And you can do a whole range of things in terms of your membership, including connecting with other members. So I urge you to do that. And a final pitch again, because we are an advocacy organization, so we really could use your support to help make a difference in space. So if you do make a donation to NSS, every gift will be matched up to $100,000 by our great moderator tonight, NSS Secretary and Board Member Anita Gale. So please do that, and this is in the chat, so you have it. And I did have one last thing to talk about before we close out, and I didn't make a slide for it. If you really like what we're doing here, I really encourage some of you to maybe volunteer for NSS. We can use your help putting these events on, a lot of other things to do with our membership, with chapters. So if you are interested, just reach out to me. You all have my email address from the registration form, or just I'll ask Fred to put my email address in the chat while I'm talking here if he could. So please reach out to me. We could really use your help. And if you like doing these things, we can use your expertise, knowledge. So do that. And as we close out, I just want to again thank you all for attending, wishing you all a great evening. For those that are starting their day already in some of the new time zones, have a great day and also a great weekend. I do encourage everybody to stay safe. So thank you again, and thank our panelists. Thank for all the people who helped put this great event together. Wishing you a good night. Take care, everybody.